Why the Boston Celtics are the most interesting team in the NBA. After having somewhat of a disappointing season last year, more specifically in the playoffs, the Celtics certainly have made some significant changes going into this next season. And although I do really like the acquisitions that the Celtics were able to make, more specifically kristaps, Porzingis, and Jrue Holiday, I at the same time still think there are some questions that are yet to be answered about the Celtics team. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicySports, I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Over the more recent history, the Boston Celtics have just been one of those teams that has always been in the mix in the Eastern Conference. Not only have they been a very formidable team during the regular season, always making the playoffs as a relatively high seed, but also once it came down to the playoffs, they were also very formidable. As it seems like basically each and every season, they were able to make it past the first round and get relatively far. But although the Celtics were able to have some success in that regard, they weren't able to live up to their eventual goal in terms of winning an NBA championship. And it seemed like over the past 3 or 4 seasons, the Celtics were always looking to make certain adjustments in order to get themselves closer to eventually winning that NBA championship. And so far, a lot of the moves that they were able to make just weren't necessarily enough, and it seems like the Celtics have just been coming up consistently short over the years. But the difference going into this next season is the Celtics have been a lot more aggressive in some of the acquisitions that they've made, as they were able to acquire both kristaps, Porzingis, and Jrue Holiday. And when you talk about both of these guys, they were players that were providing a ton for their previous teams. Jrue Holiday was a guy that was putting up great individual offensive numbers, can get you buckets whenever you need it, also had a really good ability to facilitate for others, but in my opinion, most importantly, what Jrue would provide for the Celtics roster is a truly great NBA defender. Although a lot of people do underrate Jrue Holiday's abilities, I actually, in my personal opinion, see Jrue as one of the best defenders in the entire NBA. And when you add a player that has a capability of putting up 18 plus on any given night offensively, but also has the ability to defend basically whoever at a very high level, that's just a player that's extremely valuable in my opinion. But when you also talk about the other guy the Celtics were able to add in kristaps, Porzingis, he's also a significant add to this roster. As although KP has had somewhat of an interesting career, playing very well with the Knicks, playing pretty poorly with the Dallas Mavericks, in his most recent season with the Washington Wizards, he's probably played some of the best basketball of his entire career. And when you look at the actual abilities that KP provides out there, it's very unique. He's a 7'3" guy that has the capability to put up 3-point jump shots at a very high percentage, but at the same time, he also has the capability to create for himself as well. And when you talk about adding another guy that has the capability of putting up 20 plus points on any given night, which is the type of player that I personally think kristaps, Porzingis is and the player that he's capable of being, you're just talking about adding a lot of offensive firepower to the Celtics roster that already had a lot of players that were great offensively. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why am I considering the Boston Celtics to be one of the most interesting teams in the NBA and not one of the best? Well, in my opinion, although I do really like a lot of the additions the Celtics did make to this roster, like Jrue Holiday and kristaps, Porzingis, and even the roster that they've had prior, I do still also like, as I'm a huge fan of both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. At the same time, I do still think there are a lot of questions that are yet to be answered with this Boston Celtics roster. As one of those questions, and maybe one of the biggest questions, is, can kristaps, Porzingis stay healthy for the entire season? But most importantly, can he stay healthy once it comes down to playoff time? As although in his most recent season with the Wizards, KP did a really nice job at staying relatively healthy, when you look at his overall career so far, besides those couple seasons with the Knicks, KP has been injured a ton. And it really has been something that KP has been struggling with and really hindered his growth over the years. And if you have a guy like kristaps, Porzingis getting injured for the most part of the regular season, but more importantly, once it comes down to playoff time, that's really significant. KP is going to be a main part of this offense and a main part of this team in general. And if you don't have a player like that once it comes down to playoff time, it's going to be a huge hit to the Celtics roster. But another question that I have about the Celtics team going into this next season is, how will their star players in both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown play once it comes down to the clutch time in the playoffs? As when you look at both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Jaylen Brown, it's pretty clear that both of these guys are legitimate superstars. They both play extremely well during the regular season. They both even had their stints where they played extremely well during the playoffs, but unfortunately when you look at both of these players, they've also had some stints, more specifically in this previous season, where they didn't play well whatsoever in the playoffs. Now many may point to injuries for the main reason why one or if not both of those guys weren't able to play all that well during last season's playoffs, but at the end of the day, I almost feel like that doesn't even matter, because once it comes down to playoff time, basically everybody out there is injured at least somewhat. Obviously certain players are more injured than others, but if you have an injury that's so significant that it makes you basically ineffective out there, I just feel as if there's no reason to trot you out there, even if you're talking about a superstar like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. And the fact that both of those guys were able to play out there makes me believe that they were at least somewhat healthy to play, and if you're somewhat healthy enough to play out there, you should be a little bit more effective than those guys were. Now, with all that being said, as I mentioned before, both of those guys have proven the ability to play very well in the playoffs as well, but still at the same time, I do think based upon their performances last year that it is going to be somewhat of a question mark. Because if one of, if not both of your main guys aren't able to be all that effective once it comes down to the playoffs, it's going to be extremely difficult to have all that much success in the playoffs. So I do definitely think this is also a huge question mark and a huge reason for why, in my personal opinion, I see the Boston Celtics as the most interesting team in the NBA. Now, with all that being said, at the end of the day, I still do see the Boston Celtics to be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, and as I said before, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they're able to win an NBA championship at the end of the season. Because although there are a lot of question marks with this team, at the end of the day, they also have a ton of talent on the roster. When you look at what they were able to do last year, they were able to make it relatively far with the team that they did have, as they did at that time have a lot of firepower, but when you look at the team that they have now, they've added some significant firepower when you talk about kristaps, Porzingis, and Jrue Holiday. And the best part about those additions, in my personal opinion, is not only do they add guys that are very talented offensively, but they added the right guys to the roster. Both Jrue Holiday and kristaps Porzingis have a really nice ability to play off ball, as KP has a really nice ability to hit the catch and shoot three-point jump shot, and when you look at Jrue Holiday, although he does also have that ability at somewhat of a lower level, he also has a phenomenal ability to play off ball, as he was able to do so very effectively playing alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee. And when you talk about both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, both of those guys are probably going to have the ball in their hands most of the time, so adding players that have the capability of putting up great numbers but also have the capability of playing off ball is also something that I think is significant and a huge positive for Boston. Now, with the Celtics team going forward, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised whatsoever if they do struggle somewhat early on, but as the season does progress and once it comes down to playoff time, they start to figure things out and start to play some of their best basketball. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening, but I will say I am extremely excited to see what the Boston Celtics are able to do. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Celtics are one of the most interesting teams in the NBA, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.